When we think about history, we imagine towering figures, kings and queens, generals, philosophers, inventors, and revolutionaries. Their names echo across centuries, etched into marble statues and written into textbooks. But for every famous Caesar, Cleopatra, or Newton, there were thousands, millions of ordinary men and women who lived, struggled, laughed, dreamed, and died without their names ever entering the records. Their lives were the foundation upon which history was built, yet their stories remain silent, hidden beneath the grand narratives of empires and wars. This is the paradox of history. It often forgets those who truly made it: the farmers who fed ancient armies, the weavers whose hands created the garments of queens, the nameless builders who carved stone and erected monuments for rulers who claimed the glory, the mothers who raised children through famine and war. And though they are forgotten, their traces remain, like ghostly fingerprints on the past. In this series, we uncover the lost histories of everyday people, ordinary lives that shaped extraordinary times. The farmer beneath the pyramids begin in ancient Egypt, a land synonymous with kings, gods, and monuments. The pyramids of Giza stand as timeless icons, admired by millions each year. Yet, who built them? For centuries, the myth persisted that they were constructed by slaves, chained under the whip of merciless overseers. But archaeology tells a different story. Evidence uncovered near the pyramids, workers' villages, bread ovens, medical facilities, and even cemeteries paints a striking picture. These massive structures were not the work of chained captives, but of skilled laborers, ordinary farmers drafted into seasonal service. During the Nile's flood season, when fields lay underwater and farming was impossible, peasants turned their labor to national projects. They hauled limestone blocks, prepared food, brewed beer, and constructed ramps. Imagine the life of one such man. Let us call him Menka. Menka was not a king, not a priest, not a general. He was a farmer, his back bent under the Egyptian sun as he sowed barley along the riverbanks. When the Nile rose and submerged his land, he left his fields and joined thousands of other men in the dusty camps near Giza. There, he hauled stones, sweat mingling with dust, hands blistering as ropes dug into his palms. His meals were simple: bread and beer, sometimes onions. At night, he slept on reed mats, telling stories to his companions beneath the same stars that now shine over the pyramids. When he died, his name did not endure, but his labor did. Each stone he pulled became part of a monument that outlived pharaohs, priests, and empires. His forgotten history is engraved in the stones themselves. The weaver of Babylon, centuries later, in the bustling city of Babylon, amidst its markets and temples, countless women worked in silence. Among them were weavers, bending over wooden looms to produce cloth for local markets, for soldiers, for royal households. The city is remembered for the hanging gardens, for Hammurabi's code, for mighty kings. But who remembers the women who wove the cloth that clothed Babylon's people? Archaeologists have found spindle whorls and fragments of fabric, but their hands, their names, their lives are lost. Let us imagine one of them, Samira. Samira's fingers were quick and skilled. Day after day, she wove flax and wool. Listening to the gossip of her neighbors, she heard stories of the king, of merchants who traveled to far lands, of wars fought in distant deserts. Yet her own life was one of quiet toil. Her work mattered. Cloth was wealth, cloth was trade, cloth was life. And yet, Samira never appeared in chronicles. The scribes were busy recording laws, victories, and omens from the gods. History remembered Hammurabi. It forgot Samira. But the truth is this: Hammurabi's empire could not have stood without thousands of women like her. Every robe, every tent, every sail was the product of unseen hands. Samira's story may be silent, but it lives in the fabric of history itself. The soldier who never became a hero moved forward to ancient Rome. We know of Caesar's triumphs, Augustus's reforms, and Nero's excesses. But what of the countless soldiers who fought Rome's wars, only to die nameless in foreign soil? Consider Marcus, a young man from a small village in Italy. He joined the legions not out of patriotism, but necessity. The army promised pay, bread, and the chance of land. For Marcus, whose family struggled to survive, it was hope. He trained in the dust, learned to march under the blistering sun, carried the heavy weight of armor and shield. He marched for miles, slept in tents, dug ditches, and built roads. He fought barbarians on the frontier, saw friends fall beside him, heard the screams of the dying, and when he died, perhaps from an arrow, or disease, or cold, his body was buried in an unmarked grave. Rome's poets did not sing his name. His bones dissolved into forgotten earth. Yet without Marcus, there was no Rome. Empires are not built by emperors alone. They are built by the sweat, blood, and sacrifices of countless ordinary men. The invisible threads Menka, Samira, Marcus. They are not in textbooks, not in marble statues, not in great speeches. But they represent the majority of human history. We remember kings, but forget farmers. We celebrate generals, but erase soldiers. We honor inventors, but ignore artisans. And yet, if we listen carefully, the traces remain in the pyramids, in fragments of cloth, in the roads of Rome. Ordinary people left silent testimonies. They may be forgotten by name, but they are not lost in spirit. Part I closes with this thought: history is not the story of great men alone, but of everyone. And when we uncover the lives of everyday people, we rediscover humanity itself. The ancient world left us monuments and fragments, pyramids, cuneiform tablets, Roman roads. But when Rome fell and centuries passed into what we call the Middle Ages, the silence around ordinary lives deepened. The rulers, the popes, the knights, and the poets were recorded, yet the majority of humanity slipped into shadows. Today, we turn to those hidden lives: peasants who worked fields without ever holding the sword of a knight, scribes whose words went unsigned, apprentices who never became masters, and women whose roles were confined to the margins. Though forgotten, they sustain the very civilizations we admire. The peasant of the manor. Let us begin in Europe, around the 12th century. The castles and cathedrals of the Middle Ages capture the imagination. But who built them? Who fed the stonecutters, the masons, the clergy? Meet Guillaume, a French peasant bound to his lord's manor. His world was small: the thatched cottage, a strip of land, a few chickens, perhaps an ox if he was lucky. Guillaume worked the fields from dawn to dusk. He sowed wheat, barley, and rye, all while paying taxes in both crops and labor to his lord. He was not free to leave, for he was tied to the land. On Sundays, Guillaume walked to the village church, where he listened to Latin words he barely understood. He never traveled farther than a few miles from his home. His children, if they survived past infancy, would likely live the same life. No chronicles recorded Guillaume. Chroniclers were monks, writing of kings, battles, and miracles. Yet Guillaume, and millions like him, were the backbone of medieval society. Without their endless toil, there would have been no castles, no crusades, no kingdoms. The forgotten builders of cathedrals. Gothic cathedrals of Europe: Notre Dame, Chartres, Cologne are wonders of art and faith. Tourists marvel at stained glass, towering spires, and intricate carvings, but the names of most builders are gone. The master architects were sometimes remembered, but what of the stonemasons who lifted each block, the carpenters who built the scaffolding, the glassmakers who melted sand into radiant color? Take Heinrich, a mason in Cologne during the 13th century. He joined a guild, trained for years, and spent decades carving stone for a cathedral that would not be completed in his lifetime. Day after day, Heinrich lifted mallets and chisels, carving delicate tracery for windows, shaping gargoyles that still watch over the city today. His back ached, his hands blistered, his wages were modest. He never signed his name into the walls he built. His identity was swallowed by the collective. But when we look up at those soaring arches, we see Heinrich's silent testimony. The cathedral was not the achievement of a single bishop or king, it was the legacy of countless invisible hands. The monks without names. When we think of the Middle Ages, we imagine illuminated manuscripts, brilliant gold leaf letters, intricate illustrations, sacred texts copied with devotion. We know the names of a few famous scribes, but most of these works were produced by anonymous monks. Picture Brother Ulrich, bent over parchment in a cold monastery scriptorium. He dipped his quill in ink, copying not his own thoughts, but the words of others. Sometimes he added small doodles in the margins: faces, animals, even jokes that revealed a flicker of humanity in an otherwise monotonous life. Ulrich's name was not remembered. His marginal notes were often erased by later hands. Yet without people like him, vast portions of ancient knowledge would have been lost. They preserved Aristotle, Cicero, Virgil, and even the Bible itself. Ironically, these monks, who lived in obscurity, ensured that kings and thinkers of the past were remembered. They sacrificed their own legacy to preserve that of others. Women in the shadows Middle Ages are often described as an age of knights, kings, and battles, but half the population lived in silence. Women's voices were rarely recorded unless they were queens, saints, or accused of witchcraft. Take Elena, an Italian midwife in the 14th century. She lived in a small village, assisting women through childbirth. Her skills were practical, passed down orally from older women. She knew how to mix herbs to ease pain, how to help babies breathe, how to comfort grieving mothers when things went wrong. Elena saved lives, but when she died, no chronicle marked her passing. Worse, in a time of fear and superstition, midwives were sometimes accused of sorcery. Their knowledge, misunderstood by men of the church, was condemned as dangerous. Yet women like Elena were the true doctors of the poor. They carried knowledge not in books, but in memory, passed hand to hand through generations. Without them, entire communities would have suffered. Apprentices who never became masters. Renaissance is celebrated as an age of genius. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Galileo. But for every celebrated master, there were countless apprentices whose names we never hear. Consider Matteo, a young apprentice in Florence in the 15th century. He entered the workshop of a master painter, hoping to learn the secrets of art. But his daily tasks were not glorious. He ground pigments, prepared canvases, and cleaned brushes. He learned the techniques, but never gained the fame. His small contributions, mixing the right shade of blue, helping with background details, were absorbed into the name of the master. History remembers Leonardo's Last Supper, but not the apprentices who prepared the walls. It remembers Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, but not the assistants who carried scaffolding and mixed plaster. Matteo's life was ordinary, his ambitions unfulfilled. Yet without him, the Renaissance masterpieces we admire today might not exist. Sailors who crossed the known when Columbus, Magellan, and Vasco da Gama sailed across uncharted oceans. History remembered their names, but what of the sailors who endured the voyages? Think of one, a sailor aboard Magellan's circumnavigation of the globe in the early 16th century. He was not an explorer by choice but by necessity. Poverty drove him to the sea. He endured rotten food, scurvy, storms, and the constant fear of death. Many sailors died along the way. Buried at sea, their bodies claimed by the waves, Magellan's name was immortalized, though he himself died before completing the journey. But one, and hundreds like him, were erased. Without one, there would have been no circumnavigation. His forgotten sacrifice is what made the story possible. Threads between ages from Dilam the peasant to one the sailor. These everyday lives were never carved into stone or sung in poems. They belong to the shadows, yet they sustain the light. When we walk through medieval cathedrals, we walk on the labor of masons. When we read ancient texts, we rely on the copying hands of nameless monks. When we admire Renaissance art, we forget the unseen apprentices. And when we celebrate voyages of discovery, we overlook the sailors who endured misery and death. Their lives may be silent in the records, but they echo in every brick, every manuscript, every painting, every map. Part 2 closes with this thought. History's greatest achievements were collective, not individual. For every name remembered, there are 1,000 forgotten. History often feels like a story of kings, presidents, and generals. But the modern era spanning from the Industrial Revolution to today was shaped not only by leaders, but also by the uncountable millions whose names never reached the textbooks. Their stories, though lost in the margins, still echo in the world we live in. The factory workers of the Industrial Revolution's 18th and 19th centuries brought machines, steam, and iron. The Industrial Revolution transformed cities into engines of production. But in the heart of those factories were men, women, and even children whose lives were consumed by the relentless march of progress. Picture Margaret, a 10-year-old girl in Manchester, England. In 1835, her small hands were nimble, perfect for entangling threads in the textile mills. She woke before sunrise, trudged through soot-filled streets, and worked 12 to 14 hours a day in a deafening factory hall. Her pay was a fraction of an adult's wage. Yet her family relied on it to survive. Her childhood vanished into the spinning of cotton. No historian recorded Margaret's dreams, fears, or laughter, but children like her powered the engines of empire. Behind the names of inventors like James Watt and industrialists like Richard Arkwright were invisible legions, Margaret, and thousands more who gave their lives to labor. Immigrants who built nations. The modern world was built on migration. Millions left their homelands in search of a better life, often facing hardship and prejudice. Their personal stories faded into anonymity, but their collective impact reshaped entire continents. Take Giovanni, an Italian immigrant who arrived in New York in the late 19th century. He came with little more than a suitcase, speaking almost no English. He found work on the railroads, laying track across dangerous terrain. He risked his life daily, living in shanty camps, saving pennies to send home. Or Mei Lin, a young Chinese woman who journeyed to California, where she washed laundry for gold miners who struck it rich. She endured discrimination, lived in cramped quarters, and rarely saw her homeland again. The skyscrapers, railroads, and cities of modern America were not built solely by the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts. They were built by Giovanni, by Mei Lin, and by millions like them, silent architects of the modern world. Soldiers without monuments create heroes and monuments, but most soldiers remain nameless. World War I alone saw over 16 million deaths. In trenches across Europe, anonymous men gave their lives without ever receiving a statue. Imagine Thomas, a farm boy from Kansas in 1917. Drafted to fight in France, he wrote letters home about the mud, the rats, the constant roar of artillery. He dreamed of returning to his family's wheat fields. But in a dawn assault across no man's land, Thomas never made it back. His body was lost in the churned mud, buried by shells. His name might appear on a long list in a small-town memorial, but history does not tell his story. Without Thomas, without millions like him, wars would not have been won or lost. Yet we often remember only the generals who signed treaties, not the boys who died to make them possible. The women behind the curtain. 20th century saw revolutions, movements, and technological leaps. But behind many breakthroughs were women whose contributions were erased or overshadowed. Consider Rosalind Franklin, the scientist whose X-ray photographs revealed the structure of DNA. Her work was essential, yet Watson and Crick received the Nobel Prize, while her name was nearly forgotten. Or think of the thousands of women who served as computers during World War II, calculating trajectories, cracking codes, or programming early machines. Women like Katherine Johnson and her colleagues at NASA later guided men into space, but for decades, their contributions went unnoticed. Beyond the famous few were countless unnamed women who worked in factories, nursed the wounded, and held families together while men went to war. They did not march in parades or sign laws, but without them, societies would have collapsed. The anonymous artists of culture is not only shaped by great names like Picasso or Beethoven. Folk songs, oral tales, dances, and crafts were created by nameless hands and voices. Consider the blues, born in the fields of the American South. Enslaved people and their descendants sang songs of sorrow and hope, their names erased by time. Their music gave rise to jazz, rock, and hip-hop, the very heart of modern culture. Or the folk tales told by grandmothers in rural villages, stories never written down but passed through generations, shaping morality and imagination. These storytellers were never published, never quoted in textbooks, but they carried the soul of their communities. The digital age is invisible builders today. We live in an age of technology. We know the names of tech giants Jobs, Gates, Musk, Zuckerberg, but who writes the code, moderates the content, or assembles the devices in factories across the globe? Think of Ananya, a young software developer in Bangalore, writing code for a global app. Her work shapes the way millions communicate, but her name will never be known outside her team. Or Li Wei, a factory worker in Shenzhen, who spends long hours assembling smartphones that will be sold worldwide. Each phone passes through dozens of anonymous hands, Without them, the digital world would grind to a halt. The irony of our time is that we live in an era of constant connection. Yet the lives of those who build that connection remain invisible. Why their stories matter. From Margaret. In the textile mill to Ananya writing code, the lives of ordinary people remain the foundation of history. Leaders may command, inventors may innovate, but without the hands, sweat, and sacrifice of the forgotten millions, nothing would endure. Their stories matter because they remind us that history is not only the story of the few, it is the story of us all. Every time we admire a cathedral, ride a train, use a smartphone, or listen to music, we are connected to the nameless. They live on, not in statues or textbooks, but in the world they helped create. Final reflection: the lost histories of everyday people has taken us from ancient farmers to medieval peasants, from immigrants and soldiers to digital workers, across centuries. One truth remains: history is not the property of kings and queens, it belongs to everyone. And, though their names may be lost, the echo of their lives is all around us.